Out of the way. Okay, just check you can all see that. Okay, so yeah, we're going to talk today around the West Northamptonshire Council's tree strategy, and then also a bit around community engagement. So my name is Russell Horsey. I'm a chartered arboriculturist, and I've been kind of practicing urban forestry for about 25 years. I did initially train out in Toronto, because at the time there wasn't anything in the UK that kind of offered me the opportunity to learn about urban forestry. And urban forestry is kind of the management of trees in urban areas. So that's sort of parkland trees, highway trees, woodlands, sort of, hedgerows, everything really. Um, I've spent about 20 years in local government. I've worked up in London. I ran Bristol's tree team for 7 years, helped the city win European Green Capital. And then about 6 or 7 years ago, we decided to take the work that we'd been doing in Bristol and try and share it more widely. And so we set up a small consultancy. And as a consultancy, we are quite niche. So we work with councils to help them improve their services. We work on strategic plans such as tree strategies. And then about half of our work is actually working with communities across the UK to help them work with councils because that's becoming more and more challenging, I think, as councils have seen cuts. But actually to get involved in planting and to sort of understand more about their trees. So as Jay mentioned, we've been working in West Northamptonshire probably since we started actually with different groups. So parish councils, local groups to sort of try and help get things going. West Northamptonshire hasn't had a tree officer probably for about 10 years. And I can announce actually about 10 days ago, they did appoint their first tree officer for a long while. And so I'll pass the information on to Jane later. It may well be that in a few months it would be worth actually inviting him along to one of your meetings to have a chat once he's kind of understood where he's going. So as a result of the fact they didn't have a tree officer in post, we want a contract to basically come in and help them write a tree strategy. Um, in terms of how that sort of looked, why develop a tree strategy? There's becoming more and more recognition, I think, especially since lockdown. I mean, I think having been a tree officer for 20 years, it's fair to say that even 10 or 15 years ago, a lot of people weren't interested in trees or, they weren't that interested. As a tree officer, you generally deal with lots of complaints. It was very rare that someone would come to you and go, "You've got amazing trees and you're doing an amazing job." But I think actually with lockdown, a lot more people have recognized the benefits of trees. And trees are great, but I think sometimes they do too much. We know that they can, remove pollution, they can act, as air conditioning units. If you can get the canopies of your trees to overgrow a street, it can slow traffic down, so they can act as traffic calm. So there's a lot of things that trees can do. But what you tend to find is those actions tend to be within a council over a lot of different departments. And so a tree strategy is a really good way to sort of bring departments together to sort of focus around it. But if you put the wrong trees in the wrong location, they can cause problems. And historically, if you look around a lot of our cities, the wrong type of tree probably has been put in the wrong place. So you've got probably good examples of very small trees put in spaces where there could be big trees, and then quite big trees squeezed into little spaces that then cause damage. So a tree strategy is a great way to sort of look to set out an approach to do your planting and do your planting better, and just to, as I say, to sort of bring everyone on board. There are lots of benefits. There are benefits to the council. There are benefits to planners in terms of having a tree strategy because it can set policy. It can help ensure that we don't lose as many trees as part of new developments. It can help ensure that where we are losing trees, we're getting trees back. Um, it can definitely help individual teams in terms of what they're looking to do. We know that trees along the center of a highway can stop pollution from, coming off the highway and into people's homes. And it definitely can improve people's well-being and well-being, health and sort of that sort of stuff. So I think West Northamptonshire is quite interested. Parts of it are quite green and leafy. And then you've got other parts, if you think about places like Far Cotton in Northampton, where historically there would have been a lot of street trees actually, but over the years they've just been lost. And I'll talk about a case study from Far Cotton in a bit. There's a lot going on within WNC, which you guys are probably more aware of than most people. There's a corporate plan looking at green and green. There's a new transport plan. There is a new local plan that's going out, which will hopefully be including a new tree replacement standard. There's a parts development plan that's just been done. There's an estates plan. It's part of the Oxford to Cambridge arc, which in theory will be seeing a lot more development, but hopefully alongside a lot more greening. The nature recovery strategy was mentioned, which is currently ongoing, and that will be going out to consultation. We believe probably the end of September, early October. There is some work currently being done with the local wildlife trust and a new nature recovery officer who's based within the Parks Department, who's been in post for about 6 months. It could be quite an interesting time actually if we get a new government in 3 or 4 weeks. You know, Defra is currently the home of trees. Um, I'm not sure it's the right place for trees, if I'm honest. It's probably a great place for farming. I'm not sure it's the right place for trees. Trees tend to be coming quite low down the totem pole. Professionally, I'd probably like to see it in a different department, maybe health, because we know of all the benefits to trees, and it might be, beneficial to have. We know that if we can get people out walking, we know that if we people can see trees, they have less stress. They generally are more healthy. And what we have seen over probably the last 15 years is significant cuts to budgets in parks and where trees are being maintained or not maintained now. And so maybe sort of linking it to health. So we're doing a lot of work in other cities around health walks where people go out and they find the important trees, they kind of find out what's going on. So, I'm not sure personally whether, DEFRA, it's such a tiny department within government, whether having trees there is a good thing. There's obviously an England trees action plan, which is currently running out. So DEFRA is going to be doing some work on that for the next 5 years. We've had BNG and the National Planning Framework. The National Planning Framework was supposed to have tree-lined streets as part of its new adoption, but unfortunately it's been watered down and those have been taken out. And under BNG, trees don't score very highly, unfortunately, which is a real shame. So I think they've been massively underestimated the benefits. So what we've tried to do is we've tried to look across a lot of those policies and try to work out where the gaps are, and the tree strategy will try and join all those things together. When we started at West Northants, it's fair to say that they didn't really know what they had. So one of the things we've done is we've done a canopy cover. And what I'll do is I'll share the link for that later. So we've done a canopy cover map for the whole of West Northamptonshire. So you can start to look at your ward, your parish, and something that's called an LSOA, which is a lower super output area. LSOAs are based on about population density of about 1,500 people. So obviously in places like Northampton, Daventry, they're quite tiny. And then as you get out to the more rural areas, they're much larger. And the reason for that is there's a lot of data now held in terms of, pollution, health, inequality, and it's held at those levels. So what it means we were able to do is we were able to work out what the existing canopy cover was across West Northamptonshire, what the potential planting area was going to be, and also to then start to bring in some of the other data sets so that what we're starting to see is as government grants come out, they're for targeted things. So they might be targeted for flooding, they might be targeted for heat island, they might be targeted for pollution. And with this data, it will allow WNC to basically prioritize where they plant. We did a significant amount of consultation. I think it's fair to say WNC consultation team were really impressed with how many people engage with the strategy. So where we're at with the strategy at the moment is we went out to find out what was important to people, sort of over December, January. We ran some in-person workshops. We ran some specific workshops for town and parish councils. And we also ran a cross-party members training area just to find out what was going on. We did a little tree launch. The tree was planted in one of the local parks. And then we also went out and talked to lots of different places to find out some specific case studies. And I'll talk about a couple of those in a bit. In terms of the why did we look at doing a canopy survey? We needed some baseline data. There's a lot of councils that have rushed out to set very high targets. And 30% is a figure you'll hear quite a lot. There's a lot of research that shows that if you can get to 30% canopy cover, you start to see quite significant health benefits in terms of trees. So a lot of people have rushed straight to set a 30% canopy target. A lot of people have also set to rush out and put in sort of canopy, sort of planting targets, and then realize that actually they don't own a lot of land. And so they're not then sure how they managed to do that. So what we wanted to try and do is set a baseline so we understood what we had, what the potential was. The client, in terms of West Northamptonshire, was really interested in this, and actually we talked to them significantly. What we usually do in these sort of studies is we would usually take out any water. Obviously, you can't plant water. We take out any hard areas. We would take out any nature conservation areas, triple SIs. We'd also take out things like sports pitches, because in reality, whilst you could plant a sports pitch, the chances are you're not. And that would give us our unsuitable planting areas. But what we also wanted to do within West Northamptonshire was to remove areas of farmland. So we removed high areas of farmland, which is why it says that we've got 81% of land unsuitable. That doesn't mean to say you can't plant the farmland, but the reality is, West Northamptonshire doesn't have significant amounts of money. It's not going to rush out and buy lots of farmland. So what we didn't want to do is we didn't want to set a target that was, if we just said if we'd have recommended sort of 30% or 40%, it's going to be so impossible to meet that it just seemed pointless. So by the time that you take out those unsuitable areas, you end
Sorry,
up with
Russell, quick question
yeah.
from me. Sorry. well, actually, slightly two questions.
Yep.
Is that canopy cover things that people can see for their own
Yes.
areas? It
Yes.
is.
So
Okay,
what
lovely.
I can do is I can share a link, and at the end actually I can quickly run through for those that are interested how it works, so they can then go and have a play with it themselves.
Okay,
And
excellent.
I can share the fact sheet that we produced as well, which kind of talks about some of this information. And there's some information in there about, different ward information as well. So there's quite a bit of information we can share around that.
Okay, okay, lovely. And actually, the other question I was going to ask was where are we at now? But I think that's probably on your slide, isn't it? Is that the
So yeah,
9% figure? Yeah,
so
sorry.
currently we're at an average of about 9%. And we currently have a potential when I remove all those areas of about 10%. So what we're recommending in the draft is a 20% canopy target. Now that's still got to go through approval internally, but that's what we're suggesting because we recognise that actually under some of the new NELM schemes and some of the new forestry schemes, some of that farmland is likely to be planted by farmers. So, we're expecting to see new hedgerows. We'll expect some will put some of that land into woodland. So, to potentially see 2 or 3% across maybe the next 30 years of moving to trees and hedgerows and woodlands, I don't think is unreasonable. So that's what we're suggesting. What we've also done is we've tried to tie in with something called tree equity. So tree equity is a score that looks at a number of different parameters. It looks at social deprivation, heat island, health, and it's something that the Woodland Trust has worked to UKIs that's come across from the States. And so again, I can share a link to tree equity. Now, this has only been done within the urban areas at the moment, and so some of the smaller villages and towns aren't included. But for places like Daventry and that, again, you can start to look at a tree equity score. And here you can see I've got one clicked on 50. 50 is not a good score. You want to be at 100. 100 is a good score. So again, there are some large areas where the score is quite low. So again, this is just giving the new officer the ability to sort of say, if we do get funding in, where should we target it? Where are the areas that have got the least tree cover and could need that? As I said, we did quite a we had hundreds of people respond to the consultation, and hundreds more actually visit us. We did a number of different workshops, and some of this probably won't be surprising to you because you've been working with the council and in the area for quite a while. So, there are still legacy issues. We've noticed there is some disjointed working. Trees historically, under all the before the authority came together, were all dropped into different contracts. So some of the trees are currently managed in waste contracts. Some of them are under an ID Verdi contract. Some of them are currently under an ID Verdi contract, but that land has been passed on to town and parish councils. And when that contract sort of comes to an end, it's then town and parish councils. Um, Highways manage a significant number of trees, but I think no one within WNC knows exactly how many trees they've got or where they are. So that's one of the things we're suggesting that they need to do. There are issues around planning and development. There currently isn't a tree replacement standard if trees are being lost per se on development. So we're recommending some improved policy to go into there. There are issues around highways. Currently, the highways don't want to be replacing trees within the highway. We're suggesting that's not a good thing, and we know there's a lot of public demand to see new highway trees go in. In fact, we'll talk in a bit about a scheme in Far Cotton where residents have raised money to put street trees back in. So we know there's a demand. We also know that trees in the highways close to people's homes is the best place for them. Um, we believe there is a loss of mature trees on private land. And now that we've got that baseline, it means that in 3 or 4 years' time, the same canopy study can be run again, and we can start to see if that is changing. Now, this again, the data is only currently being flown every 3 or 4 years, so it's not something that we can say for definite. But my experience, just generally of working in the sector for 25 years, is I think we are seeing trees being lost. There wasn't the necessary expertise and skills within the council. I'm pleased to announce that they have appointed a tree strategy officer, and that officer now his job is to take this strategy forward. He's a gentleman called Paul Fountain. He started about 12 days ago, I think it was now. Um, there's also an issue at the moment in terms of, the ambition and resources. There aren't significant resources to manage the existing trees or replant. There will be the opportunity for the new officer to bid for funding. We're starting to see more funding coming from government. And as I said, competing land use is going to be an issue. You've got a large area of farmland. You're probably not going to plant all that with trees. Plus, also we've got new pests and diseases coming in. Ash dieback's having a significant impact across the UK. And again, if you'll see that significantly probably along your highways where you've got a lot of old highway verges that have probably been in 20 or 30 years, and those woodland belts predominantly because ash was quite a quick grower, would have been quite a high percentage makeup. There are opportunities. I think one of the things, I mean, this tree strategy came about because of cross-party support. There is cross-party support to want to do more with trees and understanding the benefits. I think that's very good. We know there's really good local knowledge out there. There's lots of local groups that, want to see more trees, know where trees are. So I think it's just about joining that up. Um, WNC does need to work to improve its information and data. The new officer is very keen to do that. I think that's really good. They will need to potentially recruit more than just who they've got, and I think there's the opportunity to do that. Um, One of the key things I think is going to be key for WNC to take this forward is actually building partnerships with groups like yourselves, with more community engagement and volunteering, and especially working very closely with town and parish councils. We've talked to a lot of town and parish councils, and they're keen to do more, but a lot of them don't have expertise. So I think that the WNC can provide that expertise, and where parishes and towns have got land, then hopefully we can see more well-designed trees. That doesn't mean to say going to tree all your green spaces. That's not appropriate. It's about, putting good trees in good locations, where they're going to do the most. But actually and in some locations that might just be 5 or 10 trees. It might not need to be much. And I think that's really, really positive. There are groups, I'll mention Wootton Parish Council in a bit, who we've done some work with, where they've looked to plant, and they've brought in external funding to do that. So I think it's really good. We had responses from pretty much across the authority. I think that was really, really interesting. There were really, really good response across. This is probably one of the highest responses they've had on the strategy in recent years from WNC. So I think it shows again, people really are interested in their trees, really do want to see more stuff around nature. So I think that's really good. Um, Most people like trees. This is really important to us. As a tree officer, the majority of people you hear from are people that don't like their trees, because the trees drop leaves, the birds poo on my car. The tree that's been there for 50 years is suddenly blocking the new solar panels that I've put on. Okay, maybe shouldn't have put the solar panels there. So, there's a whole hazard of as a tree officer where you tend to find people, that contact you don't like trees, but actually 72% of the people that responded to this said they like their trees. And, for a significant number of reasons: health and well-being, air quality, climate, biodiversity, acting as a sound barrier, for food. So, I think that was a really positive thing for us, because I think it's a really good question to ask. So, this was slightly interesting. We got a slightly odd response to this. For a lot of people that responded, they felt that they had enough trees within their area. Um, and we kind of wanted to deal more with this, actually, because we were surprised that quite a lot of people thought they had either too many or the right amount, because we know from our own experience that 9% canopy cover isn't very high. And I think a lot of this, we have dug into this, and we dug into this quite significantly with the town and parish councils, and we think in a lot of cases it's because historically, when trees have gone in, it's been like a pack of trees from the Woodland Trust or another charity that have just been dumped in an open space with no thought for design or how they're going to grow in the future. And so therefore people are like, well, too many trees, or they're causing problems. And actually, when we did some work with the town and parishes to say, well, that's probably not the best way to design, a lot of the town and parish clerks actually said, yeah, you're right. Actually, thinking about the spaces we own and manage, there is space for more trees. I think we just need to think about planting in a different way. Um,
Sorry, me again, but
that's right.
just on that, which I think that is a really important, interesting point. That you've got to be really careful about where you put trees. And will the tree strategy
Yes.
provide that guidance through sort of written procedures or sort of protocols of where you put trees or how you go about putting them in?
Yeah, so part of that, so what we've done is that the strategy sets the overriding vision of where we're going, and then within that there is an action plan, and part of the action plan is coming out with some of that stuff, like a guidance document as to how to plant. And it's sort of looking at a hierarchy. So yeah, the the plan's going to run ideally to 2045, maybe 2050. And then what we're doing is we've done an initial 5-year action plan, and there's a lot in that action plan for the first 5 years, and you'll see
Yeah,
that when it comes out to consult. So there's a lot of things. There's a lot of procedures and policies. Sorry, there's a lot of procedures within the council that are not working effectively, and that is stopping residents, that is stopping groups from effectively working with the council, raising money and doing more. And so there's a lot within the strategy, in terms of fixing those procedural issues, working out what they have, working out where there's space for things to go. So yes, some of that will come out. So yeah,
great, thank you.
it's about guidance, or where there is existing guidance, signposting to that guidance, basically.
Yes, yes, definitely. Okay, brilliant, thank you.
No problem. And so again, when we asked the town and parishes again, a lot of the town and parish clerks felt initially they had about the right number of trees, and it was only so we did a day of workshops for town and parishes to sort of ask more questions and dig into this. And actually, in a lot of cases, I think, as I just explained, it was I've sort of got a slide ahead of myself there. At the end of the workshop, I think we had about 80 parishes attend either in person or as an online workshop. So again, that was a huge number of town and parishes from the area that were really engaged in this. So again, that's really positive. Um, in terms of issues that town and parishes raised, um, tree management maintenance was an issue. About 50% of town and parish councils felt they didn't have the necessary knowledge and expertise to handle tree management issues. And so again, we think there's a role for WNC to play in terms of acting as a trusted partner for town and parishes. So where town and parishes, do own trees and they are managing land, then, with a slightly bigger team within WNC, they could offer that service to town and parishes. Um, Planning was a big issue for town and parish councils, actually. Because WNC, I guess when WNC went bankrupt, it sort of stopped taking on any land, and it offered a lot of land to town and parishes to take on responsibility for. And I think because of budget cuts and before the authority obviously went bankrupt, money had been cut. Quite a few of those took it on. Um, Now that's continuing, but I think the town and parishes were feeling that they don't, town and parish clerks know a lot of everything because they cover an awful lot of stuff, but they're probably fair to say most of them are not experts in everything because it's impossible. So what they were saying is that a lot of them felt that there was a lack of expertise, which gave developers the upper hand, from a planning perspective. And we have fed this back to planning as, and this is this kind of joined up thing is that there's no point in planning going brilliant. We've got a new housing development through, and the open space has been taken on by the local authority or the parish if it's not well designed, because actually no one's going to use it. We're just building up issues that are then going to come back to health because people aren't using it, kids aren't using the play area or whatever. So again, part of the sort of 5-year working plan we've got is about offering training up to town and parishes, to residents, to members, to groups like yourself, to try and even that up a little bit. And again, another issue is the recognition of the need to plant within highways. It's currently not straightforward. It's not really working and it's not very cost effective. And then there are lots of concerns about, WNC not actually managing their own trees currently, which is something that they will need to look at. And concern about the fact that if you're going to plant lots more trees, what effect will that have on the existing trees WNC manages? Um, there were a lot of people wanting to plant new trees. People were understanding, which I think if we'd have asked this question 10 years ago, some of these answers would have been very different. I don't think 10 years ago most people understood that trees were good for flood control. The general public, this is, if you're in, if you're interested in this area, you probably did, but probably most people, general public, would have said trees are nice to look at. You know, they're full of birds. It sounds nice. So I think it's quite telling the change in public attitude and the change in public understanding, probably as a result of lockdown. Actually, I think that the public are coming out and saying their priorities for trees are due to air quality and flooding. I think those are two things that were quite surprising. And again, we were seeing quite a lot of respondents saying they want to plant in areas where there was low tree canopy cover. So again, and people were starting to say things like shade. So again, like even 10 or 15 years ago, I don't think most people in the UK would have been understanding the benefits of trees and shade. Now, I trained in Canada, I worked in the States, and actually in the States and Canada, 20 years ago when I did 25 years ago when I did my training, they were planting for trees and shade because it's much hotter there. And interestingly, we are now starting to follow, and I think that's really good. So, as I said, the document's going to set a vision. It's going to set an aspirational target for Canopy. It's going to have these 5-year action plans, and I say WNC has now appointed its first tree strategy officer to work across WNC to start to sort of change some of these things. So, it's a very positive place. The strategy is currently in draft. We've got another working day next week with a new tree officer because they want to make some changes to it before we go out to consultation. It'll then do some internal review checks, and then the plan is to go out over the summer into September for a longer consultation. That will be available online, and we'll pass that information back to the group. We'll also be running a week of workshops, which is going to be the second week in September. I don't know exactly where they are yet. We need to work out where that's going to be. It's likely to be four sites across WNC, a day at each, and then we will also be running another day again for the town and parish councils because we think it's really important that we engage with them. I'm going to go on and talk about community tree planting in a minute, but I guess are there any kind of questions around the strategy? It's probably a good time to just hold for a few minutes.
yes, so there are a couple of questions that have come in. So Alexina's put a couple into the chat. So yeah, good
Yep.
time to look at those. So her first question is, how do you do the tree canopy study? Is it drones, and do they pick up the age of trees?
Right. So there's a something called the National Tree Map, which is being flown by a company, and basically they overfly all of the UK, and they're using photography and AI to map tree sizes. They also use LiDAR, so it'll pick up any tree or bush that is over 3.5 meters tall, currently. And so that then gives you a sort of digitized round circle for each tree, and then we can push that into we can push that into the canopy map. Drones, I think, will be used in the future, but at the moment, because we're working in a lot of urban areas, we can't use drones for this kind of work yet over sort of heavily built up areas. So at the moment, it's aerial photography or satellite
Mhm.
imagery is what we're using to start that canopy mapping.
Okay.
And Russell, does it cover species as well? There's the photography.
Not at the moment. There is some work being done by Forest Research. They've been starting to try and use imagery to try and work out, but they've been looking at it from a pest and disease perspective. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to use it initially to look for trees that are stressed because that's an indication that there's a pest and disease attacking. Um, it's not there yet. I mean, it's getting better. I mean, if we look at overhead photography now, and even on Google, if I think about the stuff, I mean, 20 years ago, we did the first ones of these canopy maps in Bristol to set Bristol's canopy target. It took us 9 months to get the computer to work out what was a tree, what was not a tree, and it was, and it got pretty good, but it took 9 months for us to do
Mm.
this, and we had a lot of officer time going, no, that's a car, you know, that's a shadow. So there was quite a bit of training of the computer, whereas that modeling has come on in leaps and bounds. Like we can run a canopy study now in about 3 months. So
Mm.
it's things are massively progressing.
Thank you. And then Alexina's second question is, will you carry on working with West Northamptonshire Council, new tree officer?
We're heavily invested in the area. We've been working with community groups here for about 6 years now. So we want this to work. We as a business, and we're only a small consultant, but we've invested a lot in trying to get to where we are, working with community groups that have kind of lobbied for this. So yeah, we'll continue to work with them and offer support.
Brilliant. Thank you. And
I'm
then
sure I'm sure you'd want to, Russell, but will the council still pay you to work for them?
I don't know yet. That's always the way. I can't. I'm not the council. I can't say yes. I mean, we will look for funding if we need to work with them. And to be honest, there are parishes we're currently working with across WNC, and so we want to join this up because it makes complete sense to do that. So yeah,
Of course it does. Well, we hope so too.
thank you.
thank you. And Philip, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks very much. I just couldn't quite remember what you said about how you treated farmland in your canopy considerations.
So we've
Because
suggested that type 1, type 2, and type 3 farmlands. There are 4 types of farmland. So those are the top three are not suitable for planting.
right. I
Okay.
mean, I can see there's an issue if you're talking arable farmland, but quite a lot of the land around us is given over to grazing.
Yep.
And actually, one of the things I notice is that as the as the world heats up, sheep and livestock are always coming to nestle up against my fence because I've got trees and they
Yes.
need the shade. So is there really nothing to be done with local farmers to try to encourage them to look for opportunities for tree planting?
So we've had to be quite careful because at the moment WNC just has one officer, and we really
Right.
wanted them to focus on fixing the issues within WNC and working close with town and parishes. Within the strategy, we do talk about the benefits of trees, woodlands, hedgerows. However, there are entire teams within the Forestry Commission whose job it is to do that. So what we've tried to be keen to do is not replicate what's already going on. So there are already teams there to work with farmers to plant woodland. There are teams dedicated to helping them with the environmental stewardship and NELMs. There are 2 members of staff actually within this region that cover agroforestry, and that's why we've kind of said, although when we take those out, we left with 19%, we're going for 20% because we think, like, realistically, that 10% canopy, you're never going to plant all 10% because that would mean every single part would be completely covered in trees, and that's not going to happen. So, so going to 20% assumes that some farmland will change. we've also had to be quite pragmatic because there is no way that WNC is going to go out and start buying farms. They haven't got it. There are other services that they need to be funding, and politically, it would be suicide. Like the NF, I live in Wales. Okay, we've had the
Mm.
new potential scheme coming through, which is now suggesting 10% set aside in Wales and 10% canopy cover. And the NFU has jumped straight on that and is now suggesting that means that 10% of land has to be planted. Now, 10% canopy cover doesn't mean you have to plant 10% land. Okay, it just means, you can have trees and hedgerows that cover percentages, because the animals, but the NFU has jumped straight on that and tree planting is now a very ugly word in Wales, which is a real shame because we've had some really good stuff going on here for the past 15 years. But that's a good example of a policy which was really badly explained, wasn't really well talked to the public about, and then the NFU just jumped on it. So again, we don't want the same thing happening. So I guess we're just taking that experience of seeing what hasn't worked elsewhere. So that's why, as I say, we expect some of that farmland will get planted. But yeah, we have to kind of leave that to Forestry Commission because that's where there are paid staff to do it. We didn't want to, we did, with the new officer will signpost landowners that are interested. So like, if you do have landowners that are interested in that kind of stuff, then there will be a need on WNC on their website to sort of signpost to those places. But yeah, that's kind of where we've got to with that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, and then just another one from me then, sort of going back to what Alexina said about sort of you continuing to work with the council,
Yeah.
and what you've mentioned as well about there being a lack of resources.
Yeah.
Is there a way of, and I don't really like the term natural capital, but is there a way of sort of demonstrating the potential financial benefits of planting trees for things like health and shade and stuff like that? There is a financial saving to be made there in some ways, surely.
There is. So we are recommending that they adopt a system that gives a valuation to trees for their own trees.
Mm-hmm.
So if they have to lose their own trees because of a utility company or a developer, it will give them a financial compensation. So historically, where a local authority has lost a tree, you've been lucky to get a new tree back in. Now, if you're losing a 100-year-old tree, an 8-year-old tree at 3 to 4 meters like the ones in these pictures is no replacement. So there's a system called CAVAT, CAVAT. It's been around about 20 years. It was produced by a gentleman called Chris Neelan, who was my first boss, and it's been widely used now across the UK as a valuation. And basically, what it does is it's a replacement valuation system for trees based on size. It does mean that and I've used it to get money out of developers in Bristol. We got £100,000 for one tree off a developer where they had to take out a tree to get an entranceway, and we've ring fenced that money to put back into planting. So we are recommending within the strategy that CAVAD is adopted, and members really seem quite positive about this. We are recommending a better replacement system where trees are being lost as part of planning. As WNC starts to gather data on where its trees are and what sizes they are and what types they are, they can use something called iTree. And iTree does start to give some values. So you can start to look at things like carbon capture, rainwater interception. So we are recommending again that when they start to capture information about their assets, they start to collate that. I have done some work with some startups that have looked into this, and if I'm honest, it's very difficult to monetize this at the moment. Trees in reality don't take up that much carbon. So in terms of big money coming into a city, it's not going to realistically happen. Then maybe it may be probably not. So my wife works in the water industry, and they do 5-year AMP cycles where they decide what they're going to spend on. We're now starting to see natural assets and capital being talked about for the probably first time. But again, they're still very heavily concrete focused. So I think going forward, yes, we may start to see the local water company say we need to stop water going into the system. Maybe if the local authority can plant some trees or whatever. But at the moment, it's very early days, and we've also had some issues such as there's something called Vera, which is like an international certification process where people were offsetting their trees, or sorry, offsetting their carbon across the world, and it's kind of been found to be completely flawed. So there's a lot of work to be done to make sure these things actually mean something. So at the moment, I don't see it ever becoming significant. And I think we're also seeing that with BNG. We're not seeing a lot of developers are managing to squeeze the 10% BNG back in on development sites. I think everybody thought there was going to be a rush for farmers and others with land that could sell BNG credits. I'm not hearing across the country that's happening. As far as we can tell at the moment, a lot of that's developers putting more ponds in and things like that because they score highly. So I think it's early days. Watch this space.
Okay, thank you very much. That's really helpful. Does anybody have any more questions on this part of the presentation before Russell moves on to talking about the community projects? Wave your hand now if you do. Okay, I'll take that as a no. Please carry on. Thank you.
No problem. So I mentioned that when we talked to town and parishes and even with residents, that people felt they had enough trees in their parks and open spaces. So one of the things that I've been sort of doing now for about 25 years is we plant less. There's a lot of fascination amongst government, NGOs. They want to plant millions of trees. And actually that's great, but if they're not maintained, it's completely pointless. So I think we need to change that rhetoric to saying in some cases maybe planting less is better because you can invest more in maintaining. And actually what we need to be moving towards is using these canopy targets to assess how many trees survive. Because actually if trees are not surviving, you're never going to increase your canopy. And you know, WNC could plant 1 million trees. If you don't water them, it's just a complete waste of money. And we have seen some of that, you know, there were some schemes around Cambridge where they put a bypass in and, you know, the trees failed year after year because they weren't maintained. So I think what we're suggesting is that actually, you know, better design is the kind of key stage is to sort of look at the park. So this is an example from Victoria Park in Bristol back in 2012. We did a community consultation on this park, and then we came up with a 5-year planting plan. And what you can see here is you've got football pitches on the right in this bigger picture here. You've got open space and you've got sort of large trees dotted around the edge of the park. And what we did was we suggested new avenues of trees, but we've designed them in a way so that it's not going to cost a lot of money to maintain, and also it's not going to become a sort of create any hazards. So you can see here we set them about 6 or 7 meters back from the path, so that as the trees get bigger, people can't just jump out and mug you. We've set the trees about 16 meters apart, so the trees are never going to touch. So again, what would historically have happened is you'd put in twice as many trees, and then in 10 or 15 years you need to take out every other tree. It's an expensive thing to do. If you don't have the budget, it doesn't happen, and then you don't end up trees going to their full maturity. So what you've got here is an avenue of oaks, and then in this bottom picture we've got a school where, yeah, you could have put in 100 whips, but actually the kids want shade. So actually what we've done here is we put 3 field maple in. We've given them sufficient space, and so that they'll grow up, they'll provide a nice amount of shade, and the kids can sit under them. So again, it's around looking at design. So, you know, in this case, you will end up with some good canopy cover, but you don't need to put in a lot of trees, and you do look to look after them. Now, the Victoria Park's quite interesting because we can now see those on Google. So this is this same avenue of trees. Okay, the trees were heavily watered for 3 years because the standard needs more watering. But what you can see here is sort of 10 years later, we're now starting to see that canopy. And so actually, this is what we were trying to explain to town and parishes. It means that, you know, we're not saying plant all over your football pitches, which is here. We're saying, you know, this will make this a nice place to walk. You know, we've done a scheme in Wootton where it's the main run from the housing estate through to the school. And again, we've put a new avenue in because it's really hot and it's going to get hotter. And this is going to make a nice place for people to walk. Now, you know, this looking at this photo, there is space potentially to put more trees here in the future. So, you know, but again, I think, you know, we were doing this in a way that was just allowing that park over that 5 years to build up, and we put avenues further down here. We filled up some gaps elsewhere. So it was a really good way of doing that design and consultation. And when we showed this to a lot of town and parishes, they were like, oh right, yeah, no, actually, okay, I can see that. I can see that being beneficial, but it's important to do this consultation because, you know, you know, if you didn't know that was a football pitch, you might say, let's put a woodland there. And yeah, that just doesn't work. I mentioned Far Cotton. So Far Cotton is a good example of what we see in quite a bit of parts of Northampton, in that we've got a lot of terraced houses. In the 60s and 70s, a lot of trees went in. A lot of short-lived trees. So purple plums, cherries, sorbus. And then as they died, this is what you ended up with down here, was just a stump left. Now, the stump being left is a good thing, because it means the utility companies can't come and put a service through there. So, you know, Virgin can't come and put a cable, because if you take out the stump and you don't replace the tree, then Virgin, when they come and put their new cables in, go, brilliant, we'll put it straight down through all the tree pits. And then you then can't plant any trees. So a stump is actually a good thing, believe it or not. But actually what we want to see is these trees. So again, we worked with this lady here, a lady called Alice Whitehead from Save Our Street Trees, and she set up a campaign group which kind of started us down this process. It's one of the first projects we worked with alongside the Woodland Trust within Northampton to try and get trees in. It took us about 2.5 years to get these first trees in because it was so bureaucratic. And I think that's, again, our experience means we can highlight to WNC where these things are not working. And again, we worked with Alice to come up with some types of trees that were more suitable. So again, where some of those trees had got in, they were probably the wrong type of tree. They were getting quite big, quite expensive to maintain, causing issues. 80 years ago, there were not many trees you could plant. Even 40 years ago, there were less. The nursery industry has done a lot of work to come up with different cultivars. So you can get narrow shaped trees, you can get wine shaped trees in terms of like a wine glass. So there's a there's a lot of ability now to choose trees that are going to be good for much better for location. And so what Alice did was she basically went and did a big survey to all the residents saying, these are the pits we've identified. These are the trees that we think are suitable. Would you like one outside your house? And which one of the three trees would you like? And people chose. Now we weren't, I have planted in the street with communities in San Francisco because they don't have utilities there. So this is just a photo. We had to get contractors in that can dig in the highway to do this, which means it is quite expensive. But Alice worked with local businesses. Rotary gave them some money. Local businesses gave them some money, and they raised money in order to get the trees in. And there's now 30 trees in. We've also given out watering cans. Usually it would take 3 years to get one of these trees established. All of the trees are established within 2 years because all the residents were coming out every week and watering the trees. We gave them instructions on how to water, where to water, and the trees have done really well. We have had one vandalized. Somebody has moved in recently and has cut the tree, unfortunately. So I mean, you can't stop that, but I think even one from 30 failure is a great success rate. And had that person not moved in, it should have been 30 from 30. So I think again. But we've got lots of other groups that want to do this, and at the moment they've come to us. A couple of groups come to us, and we said, look, until the new tree officer fixes the processes, because it takes too long, it's too expensive. Hold your horses. Let's get those fixed to make sure that your money's being spent well. And then I sort of talked about Wootton Parish Council. So the lady with the pink coat here has just stood down. Actually, she was one of the local councillors, and she was desperate to get some new trees in. So again, she bid to government to DEFRA for some urban tree challenge funding. And basically, we've been able to put in about 70 trees over 2 years with this group. So again, we did consultation. It's a semi-rural area, so it's surrounded by houses. There are fields further down that are much more rural. So actually, what we did was we look at what species were around there, and we came up with 3 different types of trees that were suitable. Helen did a significant amount of consultation with residents. They held meetings in the parish town. There was exhibits, exhibition stands, and actually, what we've done here is we've put in a resistant type of elm. So it's an Ulmus New Horizon. Is this First Avenue? And actually, what's good about this is although it's a cultivar that we know is resistant to Dutch elm. What we've found out in the past 5, maybe 10 years, is that actually the white letter hair streak butterfly, which is a critically endangered butterfly, UK butterfly, actually nests on this tree. We weren't aware of this when the trees were first went in. We've been planting them for about 20 years now because they're really resistant and they're really good trees to get established in urban areas. So we're actually now finding that when native butterflies and stuff are starting to take, so that's really positive. We had about I think about 70 or 80 people came out. We had the school came out all day to plant. BBC Radio Northampton came out and interviewed us in the morning, and their breakfast show, fair play to them, came out and sort of did a morning with us. And so this went in, and then this year we finished off with another line of different trees a bit further down that's connected. So again, this was done with our input in terms of design. Helen and local residents and other parish councillors basically did all the consultation, and then we organised the community planting event to allow people to engage. And again, we haven't lost any of these trees. They're all doing really well. There is money within the scheme that they applied for to water the trees for 3 years. Again, we've given out watering cans, and some of the residents are also watering the trees. And it's made a massive difference. So if you know Wootton, so this is the open space. If you'll stand with your back to the Wootton Parish Hall and look directly out, you go across in between a housing estate, and this is the open space that then leads down to one of the secondary schools. And this again, we set the trees back. They've been set far enough apart; they're not going to go into each other. We've designed them so that the trees are nowhere near the lampposts, so they're not going to cause any issues in the future. And this has really kind of brought this open space to life, actually. And there's a lot more dog walkers and a lot more people starting to use this. And the trees have only been in on 2 or 3 years. So yeah, if you're local to that, go and have a look. And then one of the other things we do is we are starting to do more work now with areas of high deprivation and low canopy cover. So I mentioned the tree canopy map. What we're now looking to do is we're trying to find groups. And so this is a group in Grimsby. It has the lowest canopy cover I've ever come across in my career. It's about 3%. massive areas of high deprivation, lots of demand for upskilling, and part of the country that's really feeling left behind. So there we're working with a new startup which is actually interested in housing. They're not actually, the trees were not what they were set up to do. So they were set up to basically buy derelict and run down houses from slum landlords, do them up and rent them at a socially affordable rent. But that organization has recognized that just doing the houses doesn't work on its own. They want to improve the local area. They want to put street trees back in. They recognize their canopy cover is so low. I think the average life expectancy in this part of Grimsby is about 10 years below the national norm. So what's really interesting here is whilst their main thing is about these houses and their plan is to do up 100 houses, they've recognized that green is part of this. And so we had again about a year's worth of work. We worked with a group called the Great Streets Foundation to help us with some fundraising. The council, when we worked with council here, didn't think it was going to work. They tried planting trees in this park before; they'd all been snapped, and so it took a lot of cajoling for us to do it. But and I kind of honestly feel they believed that it was going to fail again. But East Marsh went out and spoke to loads of people to the point that we only had 30 trees to plant the first year. 200 people turned up to plant the trees, which for me is quite worrying because 200 people with spades is not good when you're trying to plant 30 trees because you want to make sure everyone's safe. So 200 people plus kids. It was a bit of a hectic day, but all the trees have gone in, and the residents are watering. The fire service came out, the local utility came out and did scanning. The mayor came out. Grimsby Football Club sent out. I'm not a big football fan, but they sent out some players that all the kids thought were amazing. We had 3 schools came out, and that really kicked things off. And again, unfortunately, we have lost one of those. I think it just didn't take. But the rest have survived, and they're now into year 2. And off the back of that engagement, we then went out to schools. So yeah, sorry, this is just a quick picture. So this is last summer. So again, the trees have been watered. We've heavily caged these trees here because of the vandalism, and you can see some of the cages have been attacked. And we've put an extra post in. We'd usually only do 2 posts, but again, because people worry about the vandalism, we beefed up the security around the trees. We don't mind people attacking the cages. And again, the trees are doing really well. And then yeah, so this year, winter just gone, we've just planted up in 8 schools. A much bigger scheme. We did 96 of these standard trees, and we did 5,500 whips over 2 weeks in schools. So we came up with a design plan for each school. We went and spoke to the schools. In some cases, the children in the eco club came out and told us what they wanted and helped us with that design. And then basically we went in, and it was a much bigger. Now, bearing in mind, I said this group is interested in their main focus is doing up houses and that kind of stuff. So this is a whole new thing to them. Their first sort of tree planting experience was last winter, and this winter they had to get really stuck in, and sort of 2 or 3 of their staff came out and are now really upskilled to the point that they can go and do this themselves. Now they need help with design and they need help with logistics, but actually they've had 2 weeks with my team and they're now confident enough that in the future, if we can do some designs, they'll go into the schools and do it themselves. Now, there are some issues. 96 big trees comes on a big articulated lorry. You need to have somewhere safe to put them. 5,500 trees with all the paraphernalia, again, is pallet loads and pallet loads of stuff. So again, you need somewhere safe to store it. So again, think about logistics. We were there a day early, which was good because my nursery messed up and forgot to load the trees on the Friday and didn't load until the Monday when they were supposed to be delivered. So they didn't actually arrive till the Tuesday morning when we were supposed to be starting planting. So again, a little bit of panic. These things never go according to plan. But because we'd had a day to get everything set aside, we spent that extra day moving stuff around the schools to make sure everything was ready to go. And we've had a very successful week. We're keen to encourage the next generation. I think that's the key thing for what we're doing. We need to inspire young people. Young people can do a lot more than we think. There was a bit of luck of horror when I started giving children a steak pounder and helmets because the teachers were worried they were going to hurt themselves, but we lift the steak pounder on and we stand there and watch them. But actually, for a lot of these children, they don't have a garden or they don't have access to green space. And so we include education. We talk about, why the tree is important. We talk about the benefits of the trees. Depending on the age of the children, we slightly vary what we talk about and what level we talk about. We did have an 8-year-old that came out who, to be honest, could have been doing a master's in biology. His understanding of tree biology was amazing for an 8-year-old. So, there's always things to surprise. There are some jobs that are quite challenging. So this lady, Carolyn, who's one of the helpers from East Marsh, we use this Hessian mulch to go over the top. you can't really give kids knives. You know, when you've got things poking up. So there are some jobs you have to do yourself, but the majority of the jobs are done by the children. You know, they carry the trees to the right location, they dig the holes, they have a tug of war to put the tree in. They're asking questions, and in many cases, we basically have a group come out every hour, and at the end of the majority of those hours, the kids didn't want to come back in. In fact, the last day it rained so heavily, we were all absolutely drenched, and the kids didn't want to go in. So yeah, again, the more you can encourage young people, the better. You do get some amazing comments. You know, one of them, sir, why is there a shower nozzle on my watering can? Again, showing that these kids have never had access to nature. And actually, what East Marsh are now doing is they're now going back into these same schools. They're doing more educational stuff. They're doing design. They've got some grant funding for some poetry, some design. So again, they're looking at different ways of doing things. I think that's the key thing is we need to inspire the next generation and we need to learn. You know, there's a lot of good work out there. Community planting is seen as quite frightening. A lot of people aren't sure how to do it, but actually it can be really rewarding and it's not that difficult. So yeah, so that's it. I'm just going to recommend another report to you. We work with Create Streets on this and the Barclay Group, and this has gone into government. Went into government about 8 months ago, and this is basically looking at showing where some of the problems are within our structure, you know, where politically we need to make changes to legislation, where things can be improved. It's available online, and there's a lot of really good information and good case studies in that to sort of say, you know, these are things you could change. So actually, if you are working with different councils, you know, different local authorities, etc., this is a really good read if you're interested in the sector, just to kind of see what things are. And this talks about making it default that we should just be able to green up our streets. At the moment, I don't think we're there. And we hope with the next government that they'll pick this up and we'll start to see a big change. So yeah, so there's my email address there. It's my colleague Sarah who's been working with me on the tree strategy, and then if you know the tree strategy email is available when the tree strategy goes out for consultation. If you've got comments, you can feedback. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was really, really interesting. Much longer than I was expecting it to be, but that was fine because actually you talked really fast and it was still quite long. So there was an awful lot covered in there. Yeah, really good and really inspiring to hear those stories of community planting. I think we definitely need to see a lot more of that in our area.
Yeah.
Have people got any questions to ask? Please do put up your real or virtual hand if you have. Mick.
Russell, yeah. I went to the Wootton
Oh, brilliant.
gig, which was very good, uplifting stuff. One of the things that we're doing is this More Trees Now. They came along from the Netherlands, and just this week, I mean, well, they went to Corby and they did a harvest there, and then we did one in Martinmere Woods in next to the Windhover. That is a wood which I don't know if you've walked around, but is pretty unusual, I'd say. It's been planted about 16 years ago, and all the oak trees are literally 2 meters apart.
Oh, right, okay.
There's about, I don't know, I haven't counted them, but you know, there are hundreds of them.
Yeah.
And they're all looking very unhappy.
Oh, right, okay. Not good.
So that would be one that in your tree canopy count, you might want to have a look and suggest how that can be improved. Most probably with culling about, I don't know, 90% of the trees so that 10% can grow properly.
Okay, how tall are the trees now? They're quite tall.
Yeah, they're about 20 meters tall.
Oh, right, yeah, okay. So yeah, too tall to transplant. That's a shame.
Yeah, and they're all, half of them you can just push over because they're all. But anyway, we did a harvest there. And I've now set up a Facebook page with I've sent it to Helen and to various other experts mainly in Northampton. I'm trying to reach some of the other areas of the county and into North Northants. I'll send a link to you so that you can help out. The idea is that if we are do something like tree harvesting, that we can put on an event about once every, say, 3 weeks, and so you've got the volunteers can move around and they can actually feel like they're in a group that is actually doing something.
Yep.
One of the things that, because I was talking to Bruce Durham. Have you heard that name before?
Yep.
Harbor Trees.
Yep.
He's got a group that does that. He talks to farmers. He believes that councils are frightened of farmers are frightened of councils and don't really pay attention to them because they see them as just a bit like, I suppose, the Welsh farmers,
Yep.
people that set rules that
Yep.
just get in the way of their job.
Yep.
So he was talking last week with me about how you engage farmers such that they can see that it's a benefit for them to plant hedgerows rather than
I would start
um,
with I would start with young farmers, I think.
yeah,
I mean, realistically, if farmers are interested in what we're talking about, they're probably already
yeah,
doing it.
yeah,
And
yeah,
trying to persuade older farmers to change their ways is quite challenging. I live in a rural community. I think
yeah,
younger farmers are now being taught slightly different things. They're starting to get it, and I think there are now good case studies out there showing, as was mentioned earlier, if you plant shelter belts or you plant slightly larger hedgerows, then we know that sheep and cattle will go to those when it's sunny, so they don't burn as much energy, and they'll shelter in them in the winter, so they'll fatten up. So there's a
yeah,
great case study
yeah,
from a place called Pont Bren in Wales, where Welsh farmers basically planted along their hillsides with these shelter belts, and their sheep fattened up a lot quicker. They lost a lot less soil because basically the tree roots were allowing a lot more water to get into the ground. So they got, although they lost some pasture, what they found was
yeah,
the pasture that was left was being better watered, so they got better grass. So I'd
yeah,
start with younger farmers. The other thing you could look at with your scheme is whether you could grow those trees on. So I think one of the issues is that with what you're talking about, because those trees are so small, it's quite difficult to find urban places to put them. Now, if they were grown on to be
yeah,
slightly taller, then actually potentially they could go into urban areas. So like, if you could put them in a sort of there's bags to stop the roots from girdling, and you could grow them to maybe 2 meters tall,
yeah,
then potentially you could start to put those in urban areas, cage them, and let them get away. So I think it's that I've seen that used quite well in the States actually.
yeah. I mean, we're harvesting trees that are between knee height and shoulder height. So the shoulder height ones are getting there, shall we say.
Yeah,
But I was just wondering, in terms of a strategy of volunteers, because in Holland, they have harvested 2 million trees over 4 years. So it's a significant amount of
yeah,
resource that could actually be used, and whether
yeah.
that features in your strategy and also how you engage farmers to receive those that amount of trees rather than an
So
urban situation, a sort of I don't know, it's a rural situation really.
that isn't so the latter bit isn't the role of the tree officer, as you said. That's not what this role is about. That you need to be
But
engaged
as
with
a tree
forest.
strategy
So the
for
tree
the
strategy does talk about
for
the need to work and pull together more volunteers and try and find a way. But again, you need to find some way to make sure they've got stuff to do. And I think at the moment in those initial few years, the planting events are likely to be few and far between whilst that gets built up.
mm,
So I mean, I suggest talking to like the Forest Commission has two dedicated staff that their job is around agroforestry. That they also have other people that are out woodland creation. So I think it's a case of approaching your woodland creation officers within Forestry Commission England, saying that there's this offer out there, and then they're aware of it because they're getting
yeah,
paid to go out and talk to farmers. They're getting paid to go and talk to them about what they could do, and then if they can say, "Oh, by the way, you get a grant, and there's local people that will come and help you plant." Farmers that are interested will bite your hand off.
if you've got those contacts that'd be great. I'm not at the moment, I'm knocking on Southsea Forest and they're just saying they're too busy to be able to do harvesting in their forest.
Yeah, I mean we're also seeing a lot of community nurseries popping up with no market. I think that's the problem is there's a lot of community nurseries that have been funded recently, and then we're seeing quite a lot of them panic in January, going, does anyone want to buy any trees? So there is a massive oversupply at the moment. Ironically, Scotland's just cut their planting budget by 80% for this year going forwards. The nurseries have got a forward stock ready to plant that for the next 3 years. So at the moment, we're in an issue where there is going to be a lot of Scottish trees dumped on the market because they can't there's no money to put them in Scotland. So at the moment there is an issue at the moment of just massive oversight. So that's why I think with what you're doing, if you could maybe find a way to grow them on, and those shoulder height ones, even if you dig them up, they probably need to go into something like an air pot for at least a year and be maintained to get their rooting system back into kilter, and that'll allow them to establish much better.
That's not how the Dutch do it. They plant out straight away.
Well, it might not be how the Dutch do
because
it, but I'm just my experience
yeah,
having worked with a lot of community nurseries is that for shoulder height
yeah,
trees, I think you want to be, because you're going to damage so many roots. There's a high
yeah.
risk that they'll fail. I mean, for the smaller ones, yeah, it's just like a whip. You're probably fine, but I think you need to find where the market is for those trees, and I think there's a lot of competition from places like community nurseries as well that are
I mean,
very strong seed.
you say there's competition, but they're selling and we're giving them away. So that's a difference. And then what Bruce is doing is knocking on farmers' doors saying,
Yeah.
do you want your hedgerows re-gapped?
Yeah.
Where the gaps are, and he's finding quite a lot of success. He's not using the more trees now at the moment. At the moment, he's going with saplings, which are, I think the government seem to be giving them away almost, don't they? These saplings.
HS2 just came on. Yes, I mean, I think again, talk to Forest Commission, talk to people that are talking to farmers.
Thank you. I'm just gonna. We've got a couple more questions, so going to move on to those. So Mark, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, look, fascinating new area for me. I just an observation really, and I'm interested in your view. So I live in rural South Northamptonshire, Boddington, and my observation is that obviously the farmers love to look after the hedgerows with a close clipping.
Yes.
And gradually over the 20 odd years I've lived here, I've noticed that the few trees that were sort of growing out through the hedges have sort of died over time, and now there's very few, and there's no apparent will or strategy to replace them. And quite a few of those hedgerows, as you're driving down the road, you think, well, they could allow trees to form in the hedge with no impact on the land, but obviously if they have to plan around it for their cutting schedule. It seems to me that would be a way of increasing cover quite significantly if we could have strategy. I wouldn't even know how to go about that, but I just wondered if you had any thoughts.
So the Tree Council did try a scheme about 10 years ago to do that. And so it was about local groups finding farmers that were interested and either going out prior to the cut and marking up trees that could go on to be those new hedgerow trees, or potentially interplanting with those new hedgerow trees. And then you kind of put ribbons out on markers so that when the flail comes along, it goes around them. And then you kind of go in and prune them a little bit until it probably needs 3 or 4 years for the tree to get up and away so that the flail can see it. But I think it's attaching ribbons is what they did, and they had some quite success across there. But again, it was down to local groups finding farmers that were interested in doing that.
Thank you. So I've got a couple of questions in the chat as well. So one from Richard Hollingham. Can you recommend strategies to encourage parish councils and residents that seem quite complacent, perhaps complicated by concerns on behalf of the PC about liability insurance? This is something that does tend to come up a lot.
Yes. So one of the things we have said within the strategy is we think that there's going to be a need longer term to do more parish-based tree strategies. Now, they're not going to be like a tomb of thou must and thou must not. It's more looking at local landscape character assessment, maybe highlighting the most important trees in your local area, and then having some information in there to kind of dispel some of those myths. Now that we have done some frequently answered questions, which WNC is going to adopt, and we are going to offer those out to town and parish councils to also adopt, which kind of says, there is no legal right to light if there is a tree. That's not the case, and you shouldn't be pruning trees because because you can't get cable TV, get them to move the satellite. So that there's that sort of stuff in there. But as I said, so if you look at Epping Forest District Council, they did a bunch of these sort of localized kind of village-based tree strategies. So there's a really good one for Roydon that looks at black poplar. There's another one at Thaden Boys. And so what we have recommended in the strategy is over the course of this is to start to produce some of those, because we recognise across WNC you've got very different landscape character And so our strategy doesn't get you to that level of detail. That's where you need those more localized, and you know, the process that Epping used was significant engagement with each of those town or villages, with the residents, you know, competitions to show, you know, so and again, this can be helpful to planning. So, you know, you don't necessarily TPO all the important trees, you only TPO trees if there's a threat. Whereas if you have a village or town-based tree strategy, then you can, you know, if the residents have said these are my 30 top most important trees, then that can be stuck on a database so that when planning get an application in, they recognize that's something more important to the village. So yeah, we have recommended they look at that. I mean, they can take a couple of years to produce, so it's not, they're not going to be able to rush out and do it. We have suggested that over the longer term, that's what's produced. So hopefully that'll help.
Thank you. I think so. Any other questions? So there's
Quick
been a couple
one.
of notes.
Tree
Yeah, go on.
preservation orders. If
Mm.
you wanted to raise them in your local area,
Yep.
I find in Northampton there's not a sort of readily available way of doing that. How is that done?
So there needs to be a threat to the tree. So there's an expediency test. So the tree needs to be under threat, and it needs to score a certain amount of points. There's a system called tempo that's used, and it would need to score a significant amount of points to make sure that it has a what's called a public amenity. But if there's no threat to the tree, then you're never going to get a TPO made on the tree because there's no need.
And just as a sort of an aside to that, just if somebody is concerned about a tree in their area, that it's quite a good idea to approach your local parish or town council about it, because they ought to know the process for getting a tree preservation order in place. Yeah, probably good people to do that. Mike.
Yes, does that tree preservation order thing also apply to trees in conservation areas, or are they a different category?
So it's slightly different. So all trees over a certain size are covered by the conservation area, which means you need to apply for permission to remove or prune them. On doing so, the local authority only has two options. One is it can raise no objections. So if you apply to fell a tree and it raises no objections, you can do it. Or if you apply to prune a tree and it raises no objections, you can do it. Or the only other thing it can do is it has to make a TPO. So if it wants to refuse permission, it has to make a TPO. That can leave you in a position whereby, whilst the tree may be nice, if it doesn't score sufficient points to justify a TPO, as I mentioned, by that tempo is just one of the systems you can use to kind of make that assessment. The local authority may have to raise no objections because it can't justify a TPO. But when you make a TPO, there is a time frame whereby the owner or other people can make an objection and it would need to go and be looked at, and there is the ability to go to the Secretary of State to get it overturned. Hence why councils are using different systems to ensure there is a justified approach to this public assessment. But so they blanketly cover most things, but it's slightly different process. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm conscious that we're very, very nearly out of time. Luckily, I didn't have much to cover at the end part of the meeting. So, does anybody have any more questions? Thank you. That has been really, really interesting, really useful to know. Look forward to the consultation on the tree strategy coming out in the autumn, and also to the workshop. So hopefully, at least some of the people here will be able to certainly engage with the consultation and perhaps make it to the workshops. So it's such an important area, and there's so much stuff that they, as you said at the beginning, it can link into, particularly in terms of health and well-being, and obviously being a climate change group, hugely important to that as well. So yeah, thank you very much for coming and talk to us.
No problem.
Thank you. I just, in the last couple of minutes of the meeting, I haven't got much to talk about. Just to say that our next monthly meeting is on the 18th of July, and we will have Dr. Declan Ryan from University of Northampton coming to talk to us about Northampton's active quarter. So I think, again, another very interesting topic, I hope. In terms of events that are coming up, we will be present at the Billing Fair on the 29th of June. So if anybody wants to come along and say hello, that would be lovely. And we will be having another face-to-face get-together at the museum on Saturday, the 20th of July. So a little bit of advance warning for that one. I think we're now pretty much out of time. Is there anything that anybody else wants to mention before we wrap up? I'll take that as a no. So thanks very much to everybody for coming. Again, thanks particularly to Russell, and enjoy the rest of your evenings, everybody.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for organising.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much.